Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into our relationship with overwhelming force, and we'll do it through four really incredible and totally different true stories. We're talking everything from a bizarre city disaster all the way to some pretty radical nuclear engineering. So what's the answer? Well, it connects four events that, on the surface, seem completely unrelated. It's all about our struggle with forces that are just way beyond our control. We're going to see how we've gone from being victims to actually wielding these forces ourselves. All right, let's jump right in. Okay, so our story kicks off not with some natural disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane, but with something way, way weirder. A man-made catastrophe right in the heart of Boston on a surprisingly mild winter day, January 15th, 1919. The source of all this chaos, a massive 50-foot-tall steel tank. It was owned by a company called United States Industrial Alcohol. And here's the thing, this tank was known to be a problem. People said it groaned and creaked, it even leaked molasses pretty often. But on this particular day, it did a lot more than just leak. It completely burst apart. And when it burst, it unleashed, get this, 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses. Now, you might be wondering, why so much molasses? Well, the company was using it to make industrial alcohol, which was a key component for munitions back in World War I. What happened next is just horrifying. Imagine a 15-foot-high wall of this thick, sticky syrup just flooding the city's north end. And, you might think of molasses as slow, but this was not some slow-moving ooze. No way. This wave crashed through the streets at an incredible 35 miles per hour. That's faster than any person or horse could possibly run to escape it. The force was just immense. It was so powerful, it literally snapped the steel supports of an elevated train platform clean off. It even knocked a whole firehouse right off its foundation. I mean, the destruction was just absolute. It was like a battering ram made of syrup, just sweeping up everything and everyone in its path. So here's the crucial point, right? This wasn't some act of God. This was a catastrophic failure of engineering against the simple, raw power of a liquid sitting in a tank. Now, of course, the company tried to cover its tracks. They actually blamed sabotage, saying that anarchists must have blown up the tank. But after a long 5-year legal battle, the courts saw through it. They concluded it was just shoddy construction, pure and simple. The disaster left 21 people dead and 150 injured. A truly tragic lesson in what happens when you underestimate stored energy. Okay, so that wave of syrup was insanely destructive, but it was man-made, right? We built the tank. So what happens when the ocean itself decides to create a monster? This is where our story shifts, and we go from being a victim to being an observer. For hundreds of years, sailors would tell these wild stories about massive, single waves that would just appear out of nowhere in the middle of the ocean. For a long time, scientists pretty much dismissed them as myths, just tall tales. That is, until 1995. That's when a 26-meter wave, which they named the Draupner wave, smashed into an oil platform off the coast of Norway. And just like that, we had our first real scientific proof. But then came the Euclid wave in November of 2020. Now here's what's so wild about this one. It wasn't actually the tallest rogue wave ever recorded, but it was, proportionally, the most extreme. Think about it like this. The Draupner wave was a little over twice the size of the waves around it. The Euclid wave? It was nearly 3 times bigger than its neighbors. A true statistical monster. I mean, we're talking about a 4-story wall of water just rising up out of the sea. It measured 17.6 meters. That's about 58 feet high. An event that scientists think should only happen maybe once every 1,300 years. This just brilliantly illustrates the raw, unpredictable power of nature. And unlike that molasses tank, this isn't a force we can stop or contain. It's something we can only watch, measure, and, hope we survive. Okay, so we've seen ourselves as victims and as observers. But, humanity wasn't just going to sit back. The next step in our story is to become conquerors. Conquerors of one of the most fundamental forces in the entire universe, gravity. The problem of spaceflight is, it's kind of simple to say, but incredibly hard to solve. See, to stay in space, you can't just go straight up. You have to go sideways, so incredibly fast that as Earth's gravity pulls you back down, you constantly miss it. That's really all an orbit is, a constant state of falling and missing the ground. So how in the world do you get going that fast? Well, the answer is staging. A single giant rocket just doesn't have enough oomph. So what we do is use these huge, powerful rockets to get off the ground, and as soon as their fuel is spent, we just drop them. You literally throw away huge parts of the rocket. This sheds an enormous amount of weight, which lets smaller, more efficient engines take over and push the payload even faster. Just try to wrap your head around this number for a second. At an altitude of 200 kilometers, a spacecraft has to hit a speed of 29,000 kilometers per hour. That's 18,000 miles per hour. It is an almost unimaginable speed, and we achieve it through super precise calculations and just overwhelming power. This is humanity's calculated triumph. It's a direct conquest of the very force that holds our planet, our atmosphere, everything together. Okay, but what happens when the challenge isn't about escaping a force, but about extinguishing one that seems completely unstoppable? This brings us to our final and, honestly, our most extreme example yet. So back in 1963, a natural gas well in Uzbekistan had a massive blowout. It caught fire, and this thing raged uncontrollably for 3 straight years. It was burning up enough gas to supply a major city every single day. For 1,064 days, they tried everything to put it out, and nothing worked. So Soviet engineers turned to a solution that was, well, truly radical. The plan wasn't to just blow the fire out. No. The idea was much, much cleverer than that. Physicists did the math and figured that a 30-kiloton nuclear bomb, we're talking twice the power of the Hiroshima bomb, if they detonated it at a very precise depth underground, it would create a shockwave so powerful it would literally crush the layers of rock surrounding the well. It would pinch it shut and starve the fire of its fuel. And incredibly, it actually worked. They detonated the bomb, and just over 20 seconds later, that fire that had been raging for 3 years was gone. The silence must have been deafening. This was just a stunning, almost unbelievable demonstration of using one unimaginable force to defeat another. So, what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean? Well, when you line these 4 incredible stories up next to each other, you start to see a really clear pattern, a progression in how we as a species relate to the powerful forces that shape our world. Think about it. We started with the molasses flood, where we were the victim of a force we accidentally unleashed ourselves. Then, with the rogue wave, we became the observer, studying nature's awesome and unpredictable power from a safe distance. After that, we became the conqueror, using our intellect to overcome a fundamental law of physics to escape gravity. And finally, with that gas fire, we became the wielder, actually directing an immense atomic-scale force to solve a massive earthly problem. And all of this really leaves us with a fundamental question for today. As we face the immense forces of our own time, things like climate change or artificial intelligence, which role are we going to play? Are we going to be the victim, the observer, the conqueror, or the wielder? The answer to that question is really going to define our future. Thanks for joining this explainer.